It's usually there before. Hello, and welcome to Crackle Comics Weekly. This is a special Kingdom Come episode because we're running out of ideas. And we decided, hey, let's review 1996's Kingdom Come this week. I'm Mike, joined alongside by
Daniel
and Vincent.
So the same crew as always, and we did what? We did two of our favorite issue shows, and we went, those were fun. Let's change it up again. And I went, let's review 1996's Kingdom Come from DC and Mark Waid and Alex Ross. And as you can see, my very beat up copy from 1997 that was given to me when I was a kid. So I beat this book to hell and back. And Dan has a newer copy, and one of these days I have to eventually upgrade mine because it is falling apart, especially after this last reading. And Dan's never read it, and I have since probably like 1998. And then Vince, I don't know about you when you first read it, so if you want to share that.
No idea. I probably read it like 3 or 4 times.
No, so this is the first time I've read it in like maybe a decade. I think the last time I remember reading it was like high school. So it's been a while, and I am going to run through it. So as you can see, this is the cover, and I did make issue 3 our cool cover Friday this week, as well as I shared the cover of this edition on Wednesday when I revealed what we were going to review. So I'm going to run through the synopsis of the book. There are going to be spoilers, but if you don't want to be spoiled by pretty much always in print DC classic, stop now and skip ahead till later. But yeah, this is Kingdom Come from Mark Waid and Alex Ross, and this is from 1996, and it's actually Ross's brainchild as he developed this idea back when he was working on Marvels with Kurt Busiek, which I think Marvels is 94. So they picked up the idea at DC, and they got Mark Waid to write due to his experience and knowledge of DC's universe and their heroes for a lot of his work on Flash, for instance, and he'd done other spot work before that. They did tap James Robinson to write, but it ended up going to Waid. And this is very much a kind of social commentary on the state of comics in 96, as it's set in a dystopian DCU where Superman has been self-imposed exiled for a decade, and many of the famous JLA heroes follow suit after Superman's exile. And the reason for this is the current generations of heroes have become much more reckless and irresponsible than the former, and when a new hero, Magog, killed the Joker in retaliation for his attack on the Daily Planet, and in that attack Lois Lane died, the populace sided in support of Magog's actions instead of Superman, and Superman left. So Magog was kind of now the poster child for this new generation of heroes as they became even more reckless and dangerous, to the point where you can't really tell who's a good guy and who's a bad guy. And I think Ross's art plays with that pretty well in the first issue, where you're exposed to so many different characters very rapidly that you have no idea who's supposed to be good or bad. And there are helpful like character indexes in the back of the collected edition, but upon first reading, you'll have no idea who's who until like the actual traditional heroes start showing up at the end of the first issue. But Pastor Norman McKay is visited by the Spectre after having visions of the approaching apocalypse from the former Sandman of the Golden Age, Wesley Dodds, and the Spectre recruits McKay for the role of passing judgment when the time has come on humanity or the superhumans, as that's kind of we are building to the end of days. So with that, the rest of the story, Spectre and McKay pretty much just guide us through as narrators and observers. McKay will get directly involved twice in the story, but though McKay narrates, we're mostly just seeing the story unfold through their eyes, as Wonder Woman visits Superman, who's completely detached himself from humanity at this point, like I said, and he's living out on the Fortress of Solitude, which he has like set up like a virtual farm. And he's got his long hair and he's got his beard, so he just looks like a farmer. But it's Superman. And he's not even going by Clark, he just goes by Cal. And Diana asks if there's any way he'll return, especially now after Magog's latest screw up, which Kansas and like the entire United States Bible Belt and Midwest was just completely annihilated when Magog's Justice Battalion was fighting Parasite. And Parasite was able to cut open Captain Atom's containment suit, which caused this just nuclear explosion, just rendering all of that land useless. So all the crops and all the farmland is just completely useless now. And Magog's been in hiding ever since. So this is the incident that provokes Superman to come back into the forefront. And he stops an attack on the bridge of Metropolis. And Superman's return also signals the return of the Justice League. And we get comprising of members of the Flash, which this new Flash, who's like an amalgam of just like the Speed Force and maybe 3 other ones. I like his design. He's got the helmet like Jay Garrick does, and Green Lantern is Alan Scott here. I'm guessing because Sentinel was a thing at this time, and Hal Jordan was still evil / Parallax. And then we have Hawkman, Power Girl, Wonder Woman, and the Ray. And then we'll end up getting like Red Robin, Dick Grayson added on later, and you can get them more in the background. And the JLA's goal is to recruit and train new heroes to fight the right way there's like one notable exception, and that's Batman. Batman resents Superman for leaving those 10 years ago, and he believes he abandoned his ideals. And while Superman stayed and continues to protect Gotham, his whole body's broken. Like apparently, like Bane and Two-Face broke into the Wayne Manor and like ransacked it. And Bruce is just like living in the shell of the Batcave now, and he's got this entire exosuit skeleton on. So that's how he gets around, because his whole body's just broken. But he still protects Gotham with like the use of these bat robots. And he's kind of turned it into a police state where he just rules everyone under fear. And Batman declines to join Superman when he asks him, and warns him that his reemergence will accelerate the inevitable combustion, which we're building to. And instead, Batman activates his Outsiders plan with the help of Oliver Queen, the original Green Arrow, Dinah Lance, Black Canary, and Ted Kord, Blue Beetle. And they have success in recruiting many of the second and third generation kind of legacy heroes as they start to form their plan as the book goes on. And they end up aligning themselves with Lex Luthor's Mankind Liberation Front, which is composed of like many first and second generation villains. And their ultimate goal is to get the funding from Luthor for more Batman robots to help kind of contain Superman in the inevitable battle that we're going to build to. And Batman's kind of spying and figuring out what is Luthor really planning. So Batman's kind of playing both sides here, while Superman and the JLA end up having trouble turning many of the current superheroes as they're left without a choice, and they decide to build a giant prison, and it's even called a gulag. So they construct a gulag, and it even looks like the Legion of Doom's like hideout from the Super Friends cartoon, if it can't be more ominous enough. And they actually construct it in Kansas, where all that land was destroyed. And they try to put all of the bad guys or like the new superhumans in there, and it basically is just a melting pot of combustion as it sets up. And it's around this time that Wonder Woman, Superman learns that Wonder Woman was stripped of her royal heritage as the Amazons deemed her work as ambassador of peace a failure. And that action set Wonder Woman down the path to become more kind of angry and violent and more militant in her views, and more ruling by force of action than more like by peace. So here are all our kind of players that we've introduced at this point. And Batman learns that Lex Luthor has actually been mind controlling and corrupting Captain Marvel, Shazam, over the decade, making him loyal to him. And he's been using. Now, it's not. They don't come out and say it's Mr. Mind is the worms that he's like putting mind control worms in his ear from Dr. Sivana, but the worms look like Mr. Mind. So I mean, use your imagination. We're not given all the details on it, other than they're mind controlling by putting worms in his brain, but. I kind of like to imagine that it's some sort of Mr. Mind influence there, but probably not. And the plan being that Luthor sets to unleash Captain Marvel to break open the gulag, as he would be able to combat Superman, because magic hurts to Superman, and Superman at this time is probably more powerful than he's ever been before, with how much solar radiation he's just kind of been building up because he hasn't been really using his powers. That's the explanation they give in the book. And Batman is able to capture Luthor, but fails to stop the scared Billy Batson, who transforms and flies off. And Captain Marvel succeeds in getting to the gulag as the fight starts, as all the prisoners are kind of getting more rioting, to the point where this has all been building to the point. And if Captain Marvel succeeds in doing this, it'll provide a way for Luthor to cede power after the deaths of all the superhumans. And just as that time, like I said, the riot's breaking out after Captain Comet gets killed, which that's the signal of our apocalyptic battle. And then Superman makes one last plea to Batman to help him, and Batman is moved by his sentiments. I like that scene a lot. And Bruce does tip off Superman that Luthor's plan is to use Captain Marvel And as Superman's race to the Gulag, he's stopped by Captain Marvel, and that sets our battle forth. And it's just 4 issues, and the fourth and final issue is all the battle that rages on inside the Gulag, and we see Batman's outsiders eventually get involved, and they enter the battle with the goal of kind of containing as much damage as possible. But during the fight with Wonder Woman that Batman's having, they both notice that the UN has launched a set of nukes to just completely nuke the area again, and that is the kind of signaling the final hour to here. And Superman is able to stop his fight with Shazam momentarily to offer him the choice, and this happens right as the Spectre wants Norman K to choose who should suffer judgment, humans or superhumans, and Superman tells Shazam that has to be his choice, as he's the only one of all of them who's able to have been living as a mortal human as Billy Batson and as a god as Shazam. So he gives the choice to Shazam, and Superman pretty much says, I'm going to stop the missile, but it's your choice. So Shazam transforms, he throws Superman down, he grabs the missile, and he shouts his magic word, which it detonates the bomb, and Superman thinks it kills everyone, but there's like a small group of survivors, but Superman doesn't know that yet. So he goes to the UN to try to destroy everyone for what's going on, and then not knowing there's any survivors, he's then visited by Norman McKay, and Superman learns that there are survivors, and the behaviors he's exhibiting are those of the reasons why so many people kind of fear the kind of superhumans. And McKay is able to talk him down, and Superman realizes that he made the super more than the man, and realizing that mistake, Superman changes his notions and says that superhumans have to work hand in hand with humanity, using their wisdom to guide and not to lead. And he's handed the cape of Captain Marvel, who died, and he ties it to a pole outside the UN, signifying that they'll be more political and global in their ways of guidance and not kind of vigilantes. And in the end, Batman kind of ends up using his means to transform Wayne Manor into a hospital for the injured during the battle, and kind of nursing people back to health. He's able to reconnect with Dick Grayson and his son that he has with Talia in this, but it's not Damian. This is like a decade before Damian. He's also able to work together with some of the villains, like he even puts Luthor to work. And Superman takes up restoring the crop fields of Kansas in the Midwest, and he builds a memorial to all those lost in battle. And then Wonder Woman's exile from Paradise Island ends, and she's now christened an ambassador for humanity, and also takes in some survivors for rehabilitation. And the last scene sees Norman McKay back to preaching and noticing that Jim Corrigan, aka the Spectre, is among those in the church listening to his sermon. And in the epilogue section, Superman, Wonder Woman, and Batman meet in the Planet Krypton restaurant, which is owned by Booster Gold, to reflect on the events a year later. And Bruce discovers that Diana is pregnant, as Superman and Wonder Woman kind of foster a relationship throughout the book, and they want Bruce to be the godfather of their child. And Superman reveals that he's always trusted Batman, as they emotionally embrace with a nice little hug, and the child would be the perfect influence of them all. As they leave, Bruce notices that McKay and Jim Corrigan are talking about a Spectre platter, which is the dish named after his alter ego. And you can see Phil Sheldon from Marvels, by the way, also on the left-hand side of them is an Easter egg, as this book is completely full of. And that's the notion of Kingdom Come, which is kind of stayed as far as influencing factor in DC Comics throughout. I mean, just this year we had Brandon Routh reprising Superman in the Kingdom Come costume, even though he wasn't really playing that version. He was more the continuation of the Christopher Reeve Superman from the movies wearing that suit. But we've seen the Kingdom Come characters pop up again. There was a kind of weird prequel sequel called The Kingdom. I've never read The Kingdom because I've only ever heard kind of it's bad. And then I know there's a crossover with JLA called Thy Kingdom Come, which I don't really know too much what happens in that, but it's one of the DC classic Elseworld stories. And I do find it weird that it was never turned into a animated movie yet. I think it works pretty well for it could be, but I mean, more influences. Wonder Woman's armor that she wears in the final battle kind of looks like Wonder Woman's armor she's wearing in that Wonder Woman 84 movie trailer. So the definite influences have been taken from DC, kind of evergreen since 1996, though I think some writers forget to realize that the story is more of a cautionary tale than something that DC's future really should be. But I like the story a lot. I think Alex Ross's art is great, and Mark Waid has a great grasp on all the characters. I think the standouts, particularly being his use of Batman and Superman. I know Wonder Woman is more of an iffy subject, and I'm sure we'll get into that in the book. But it is a fun book to have, as you can kind of just go in and search for all the Easter eggs and like all the different kind of future version looks of the characters that are there. If that's your thing, you'll love this. But other than that, I'll open the floor. But this is definitely one of my favorite DC stories of all time.
Yeah, I mean, just as somebody who has not read it at all, to read this for the first time is obviously really exciting for me. Um, Last week when we planned to read this book, we did go through the index of all the characters, and there was a lot to keep track of in this book. And I think that's not a bad thing per se. Obviously, if you know the characters, it's really cool to see all those Easter eggs, but it just kind of builds the scale of this story. And that's one thing that I kind of wanted to touch on with this book, and I think you guys would agree with me. Obviously, this came about with Marvels, but I really feel like in this story, Ross really gets that chance to really paint physically, literally the landscape of a battle scene with all these characters, and we really get a better idea of his craft and just the scale of how he can paint. So I felt like Marvel's was a different type of scale, but this one there's so many pages, especially in the last issue where there's so much going on, and you can honestly sit there for like 5-10 minutes and just pick through all the different characters going on, flying through the gulag and all that stuff. And it's really a treat to kind of see that going on in this book. And again, just looking at the theme of this story, I mean, it's a really simple theme when you break it down, like Mike explained. I mean, just kind of challenging Superman's core values and, the values of the old guard kind of with the JLA. So, yeah, it definitely is a piece of its time. Obviously, I think comics has evolved since the late 90s. So, and just one thing to kind of note that I guess kind of hit with me, the whole thing with Norman McKay and the Spectre kind of felt like the Christmas Carol a little bit, because like he was visited by like a spirit and he was being like shown like like the future and everything that was going to happen. So that kind of reminded me of that, but it was a cool guide to kind of see it through his eyes. And like Mike alluded to, it wasn't batting you over the head with him throughout this whole story. They used kind of McKay's point of view to start off every issue, but after that, they really let the whole kind of moment speak for itself, which I thought it's always good for a comic. I'm not a big fan of narration unless it kind of serves a purpose, as we talked about with Norman. So I like that. The conversation with Bruce and Clark in issue 2, as Mike talked about, when Clark goes to try to recruit Batman. I thought that was a really good back and forth banter between the two of them, and it was pretty bitter at the time. But as the issues went on, you really see the relationship between the two of those characters is a lot more complex than what that whole dialogue kind of portrayed. And as we talked about before we came on air, as well as Mike said with all the sequels, I was just kind of curious to find out what happened to Clark and Diana's kid. But yeah, it's a shame that wasn't really executed correctly, because that could have been a cool kind of follow-up story to this whole thing. But it's one of those things where, like you said, it's probably best just to keep it as its own separate entity. But that's really all I have. I mean, I'll probably chime in and out here, but I know Vince has another 6 pages to go through, so I'll leave it up to him.
Yeah, so I had a lot of notes. A lot of what I'm going to say is largely critical, and I don't know if that's kind of just maybe that's just the mood I'm in, or yeah, I think at least a lot of what I've said will be interesting points. But first, I want to lead off with just what I often do on these dumb shows. That's kind of my thing, is some of the history and some of the background. So this is 1996, as we opened with. So Alex Ross's career in comics basically starts in 1990, where he does just like this, a painted interior comic book of a Terminator miniseries, which Terminator at that point was a license held by Now Comics, who otherwise they're really only known for, I guess they had the Green Hornet license through the 90s with a lot of books written by like Chuck Dixon. And I want to say they had like Speed Racer or something. They're pretty obscure, but they had Terminator for a short period, because before at some point Dark Horse had it, and then I think Dark Horse must get it back. And so he did this Terminator series, which may have been what got him on Kurt Busiek's radar, because he was supposed to have a story in this obscure Marvel anthology called Open Space. which Kurt Busiek was editing. And the concept of open space was sci-fi, fantasy type of stories, pairing like interesting or top-tier artists with writers that you wouldn't expect from comics. So like prose and TV. It's similar to what Marvel and DC are constantly doing over the past 20 years nowadays. But it was kind of like a challenge to see, like, what would this guy's comic story, what story would he want to tell in comics? And what if Alex Ross painted it? But the story that Alex Ross did for it never actually saw publication. And it's similar to another famous unpublished issue, because years later, Wizard put out like a open space 1/2 to finally print that Alex Ross story, because by that point he was a superstar. And that's similar to the rejected long unpublished issue of G.I. Joe that Todd McFarlane did, which Larry Hama said, no, get this kid off my book. And they put another artist on, and then Marvel, when Todd McFarlane became huge, printed that out and made a big deal about it. And then Busiek and Ross, despite that never being published, they struck up a friendship or a creative collaboration, and they pitched several series to Marvel, maybe some to DC. There are a lot of rejected or unpublished Alex Ross pitches that you can find floating around. And eventually they get the green light on Marvels, which we're not going to go into too much besides some comparisons at a certain point. And around the same time as right before Marvel's getting off the ground, all of the comics press and a lot of fans just start like furiously jerking off over Ross. And he like pretty much overnight becomes like one of the top artists in the industry. I'm talking about, Wizard and Hero Illustrated at the time. And right before Kingdom Come, Busiek and Ross get the first Astro City series, which is the first miniseries, off the ground. And I think it's actually completely done before Kingdom Come starts. And on that, Alex Ross, like, I'm not actually 100% clear off the top of my head what his creative involvement is, but he does the covers and some of the character designs, but he's not like intrinsically related to the, kind of the narrative and storylines and stuff like that. And meanwhile, Mark Waid, I have a little bit less to say on him because, I don't know, I feel he is actually less important here, and that it's actually based on something that Mike said, which I wasn't as familiar with, and I'll get to later. But meanwhile, Mark Waid is basically top dog, or one of the top dogs in the industry at the time. He's writing Flash, which Mike mentioned. He's writing Impulse, which is up and started in like a year in at this point, which was a popular and like well-liked book in the beginning. He's writing Captain America, and this is his first run in Captain America with Ron Garney, which was very, very acclaimed. And the most interesting of all is that he's the writer on Adjectiveless X-Men around this time. And I will kind of come back to that later. And he also has just finished up with DC's latest annual line-wide crossover, Underworld Unleashed, which wasn't that great and doesn't hold up well, but whatever. Now, my first question, and then I'll let some other people talk because this one is a quick one. It's kind of a prompt. Do you think that the Joker bit inspires Injustice, or is that kind of concept just a very like self-explanatory thing that you could do with the Joker?
I think it has to be at least taken inspiration from, because this is like the big like use of the Joker for Superman here. It's not I don't know if this story in particular is the first time we've seen the Joker goes to Metropolis and kills Lois Lane a bit. I know John Byrne uses the Joker in an issue of his Superman run, but I mean, not to that extent, obviously, but like this is such a famous story that, I mean, by proxy, I don't see how it can't be taken as inspiration for Injustice. I mean, Injustice, obviously, by Tom Taylor, is a different spin on it.
Well, Injustice by NetherRealm and then Tom Taylor expanding.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to give it to Taylor because I know it's the books play more with it than the game does probably.
So then, I mean, I have nitpicks, and then I'll move into kind of larger concerns. So
You have nitpicks and then old man complaints.
I mean, sort of. So
Already.
I think this book goes way too hard with the cute Easter eggs. It's a thing in Marvels. It's a thing in everything Alex Ross does, but like, it's not to the same extent. It's weird here. Like, there's a scene where, and again, it is a minor thing. Like, it's just an Easter egg to see and say, "Oh, that's cool." But also, you're supposed to notice it. So, the book Under the Hood by Hollis Mason is on a newsstand here, and that is the book that Night Owl writes in Watchmen, and that doesn't make any sense.
No, but why is Who Watches the Watchmen written on one of the boards outside in Kevin Smith's Daredevil run?
That's dumb too.
I mean,
that's even dumber.
Break the story. It's a definite wink, wink, and nudge,
Well,
nudge. You'll see it,
Yeah.
but it's not like breaking the story. It's not even mentioned.
Well, this one's actually worse because Who Watches the Watchmen that's like a phrase. Like, that's not originated in Watchmen. Like, that's what inspired the title of Watchmen. So
Right.
Obviously we know that Kevin Smith is winking at the comic book Watchmen, but any random homeless dude could scrawl that on a wall in Hell's Kitchen. So there's at least, you can justify it. But this, it's kind of a continuity breaking thing.
Well, I should say the rest of that boarded wall at the end of Guardian Devil is full of in references.
Yeah. And then there's a reference to Steve Darnell, which is one of the other Easter eggs that I wanted to point out because he's another of Alex Ross's occasional collaborators, such as on the Uncle Sam Vertigo series, which is what Ross does exactly after this. And there's an Uncle Sam cameo on one of those final pages as well. I think he's on the other side of them. So you have like Phil Sheldon, McKay, Jim Corrigan, and Uncle Sam, I believe. So then my other thing is the word, and this only really came to me as I was hearing you say it over and over again. I mean, I thought about it before, but I really want to touch on this, is the word gulag. It's not like an alternate word for the word prison. Like, it's specifically, at least in the English language, specifically refers to the Soviet forced labor camps from the 30s through the 50s. And obviously, yes, throughout the book, you have particularly Superman having major reservations about its implementation and making it in the first place and everything like that. But he also openly calls it a gulag, like in public, to his allies, to the UN. Yeah. And it's like, I don't know if Mark Waid wasn't thinking, but like, even if Superman gets to a point where things are so dire and Wonder Woman is pushing him and everything like that, and they're like, let's set up a prison for, super villains, or even in this scenario, like rowdy self-styled heroes, like, he doesn't call it a gulag. I don't really buy that. It seems weird, and I don't know. That's very strange to me the more I think about it.
Well, I don't think Superman ever calls it a gulag. Everyone else calls it a gulag. Does Superman call it a gulag?
Well, someone else names it. Like, it's not like Superman comes up with the name gulag, but he calls it gulag repeatedly. And it's like, even compare this to, I mean, the direct comparison actually here, and this may have inspired this, in fact, would be Civil War and like the like complicated prison that Reed Richards and Hank Pym set up during Civil War. And I think the Resistance side, Captain America side, even does call that a gulag in some of the issues. I don't know if it's in Civil War or other series, other tie-ins. But, Reed Richards, you can buy Reed Richards and Hank Pym being a lot skeevier about setting up a prison. And in that scenario, a lot of those prisoners were, at least early on, were more villain types and way more roguish than some of the characters here, or at least I think. And even still, Reed Richards would never call it a gulag, but Superman, he doesn't name it, but he openly says, we're putting these guys in a gulag.
Yeah, but what's worse, an Elseworld Superman doing that, or the actual characters in the Marvel 616 doing it? I'd argue the actual continuity is far worse than
Civil War sucks.
And it would be as offensive.
So then my other thing.
I think I think you're scratching the surface here, though. I think, at least the way I view the story is, I don't think it paints Superman, Wonder Woman, or Batman's side as any one side being right. They're all kind of wrong on different ends.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like, Superman comes back and thinks he can just be the same person he was. He can't. As Batman points out, you're going to hyper accelerate this. And then you have Wonder Woman, who I think is the most. I mean, we were talking about this last night off air, but I've come to the point where, like, I can buy Wonder Woman's changed sense of ideals with her kind of being broken by the fact of her losing her royal status and being banished, as she views it as failure, which changed her. It's not a different concept we've seen, especially in more mainstream movies, that has happened with characters lately. Like, I buy it, and I might not agree with it, but I can see for the change of this story for why she would be put that way. Now, it is interesting, though, I think, that we've seen Wonder Woman get more of a more violent and edgier, a more aggressive style since the New 52's kind of spurned on, which, I mean, you can infer maybe that, once again, the cautionary tale thing, Kingdom Come isn't something that we should emulate. It's a cautionary tale. So when Wonder Woman starts carrying a sword and shield, it doesn't send off the right vibes to me, and to me, it never has.
Well, for Wonder Woman, yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on Wonder Woman, and I'll skip to that. So, I mean, it's further back than the New 52. I'm sure there is a farther back origin point, but it's really Greg Rucka's run, where she's a lot. Even though, like, the New 52, like, her stories are like she's a warrior. Greg Rucka's first run, the stories aren't that she's a warrior, but that's her mentality and that's her kind of characterization. And obviously it culminates towards near the end of his run, the most infamous moment of his time with the character initially is snapping Max Lord's neck. And yes, it was a situation similar to another infamous choice in Zack Snyder's Man of Steel. It's a very similar story. It's like, I mean,
I feel like
it's not.
Max Lord's neck makes more sense because Superman could have just flown up and Man of Steel and been fine.
I mean, yeah, there were a ton more alternatives to Man of Steel, but I'm saying, like, ignore, like, thinking too logically and just think of, like, the position of the story. It's the same concept, and that's. I'm sure there's another origin point, and the whole point is that literally everyone since the creators have, like, drastically wavered on Wonder Woman's characterization and how she's supposed to fit in this shared universe and everything like that. But Rucka's where I would, and that's like 2000, like 3 to 6 maybe, or something like that.
Really?
That's where I would primarily place the genesis of that kind of more warrior-like characterization, and I don't think that was inspired by this. So Wonder Woman here, I mean, maybe it was, but Wonder Woman here, I feel like, I mean, it's another person taking the characterization wrongly, and it's older, but I don't know that there's necessarily a link here. But it just, where is that? But yeah, I mean, I think she gets pretty character assassinated here, because they're pretty solid on where they want Superman, and they're pretty solid on where they want Batman, and they need her kind of in the middle as the foil, mostly against Superman, but as a third position, because, and ultimately I boil it down to that. I mean, I said, like, everyone drastically wavers and changes her characterization with every new run, and that's because no one places her on the same pedestal as Batman and Superman, and that's like, she's supposed to be the Trinity. And then, in recent years, people laugh that DC has christened Harley Quinn as the fourth pillar. And it's
she is, but before that, it was Hal Jordan with Jeff Johns on Green Lantern. That fourth pillar's ever rotating about every other decade.
Well, in terms of sales and stuff, but I'm not sure that, like, DC marketing and editorial was ever, they never necessarily said, like, outright, like, we are placing Green Lantern with the same importance as these other three characters, even if the sales and their publishing line reflected that outwardly. But I mean, I just think, like, and obviously this is a cheap shot to make, but like, what would William Moulton Marston think of reading Wonder Woman in a story? And I think the main.
I mean, I'm going to stop you there because I hate that argument because it's like saying, what would Bob Kane think? It doesn't matter.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's cheap, but I mean, I think Wade's description of her mission in Man's World when she talks to Superman, or at least how he writes her interpretation of her mission, I think is totally inaccurate. And by original design, which again, it's like, when does original design no longer matter if someone improves it? And you look at certain characters like Daredevil and stuff like that, where the consensus accepted version is pretty different from the original. But originally, Wonder Woman, I would say, and in my like kind of headcanon, I would say her no-kill rule is arguably just as strong, if not stronger, than the other two characters.
I would disagree with your sense that she's character assassinated in this book. As like I said, I can buy it, and because it's Elseworlds, I don't think anyone can get character assassinated. Now,
well,
I do want to throw it over to Dan on this front for the fact of, for Wonder Woman, well, for what his thoughts are on it, just to get that third voice in there as he's walking and moving.
Well, I'll just say my last line while Dan, whatever he's doing. But I will add, and less notes on this one, is that, of course, Captain Marvel ultimately is put over, and he does save the day. But still, ultimately, in the way that they chose to use him in this plot, he gets the short straw out of these four characters. Because, if you were to ask any kind of comic historian, he should be the fourth pillar, not Harley Quinn, not Green Lantern, not Flash. It should be Captain Marvel, as far as the legacy and, original historical significance and popularity of these characters. And I mean, I don't think he gets mischaracterized as much as Wonder Woman in the story, but just by the nature of how he's used with the brainwash and everything like that, he does pull the short straw, even though he has his epic moments, which are some of the most memorable parts of the story.
I mean, one of the most memorable pages, I think, in comics is the end of issue 3 where Captain Marvel stops Superman. Like, that's endlessly shared always and brought up.
Yeah, and Superman in the smoke afterwards is one of the most memorable panels.
Yeah, with the glowing red eyes. I do want to talk about Ross's coloring, and I want to see how you guys weigh in on it. For the fact of, I feel like Ross's colors are pretty muted, almost on like grays here, which is odd to see. Like whenever a character is on page though, with like one of the more traditional heroes, their colors are very striking. But I do feel like it's odd that Ross's paint colors, or in terms of his palette here, are the backgrounds are a lot of whites and kind of not very deep. I mean, it always feels like there's like a misty cloud going on. Maybe that's the point, but like the way the lighting is striking, it's never quite looked right to me.
I think some of that, there's a mix of just the kind of economy of deadline and the task of painting interiors of a comic book. Like as far as like in the city scenes, like if you really look at the backgrounds, like he's not really doing like the sky. He's not trying very hard on the sky. It's like, here's the sky. And then, that's not the focus. But as far as kind of just the like colored tone and everything like that, I feel like some of that is probably comes down to reproduction. And okay. You compare this to this or Marvel's to like whatever the recent Marvel's thing that he did, not the like anthology stuff that he and Busiek are doing separately right now, but I mean like the X-Men story thing, whatever that was for.
Pages or something.
Yeah, that like obviously he is number one, a better painter 25 years later, but also I feel like you have to assume that the reproduction of whatever they're using in terms of photography or scanning, and then whatever the printer has access to and everything like that, it has to be exponentially better in capturing painted comic books.
I mean,
so I think it's a mix of
that my edition is from 1997, and
yeah,
it could be, not as good quality as Dan's could be. So, Dan, you have the newer edition. Did you notice anything like that in terms of the coloring?
I think like you mentioned, there were some. I think there were some panels, or there were some like pages where I thought like the coloring was different. I mean, obviously in today's comics, you have colorists now and people who specialize in just coloring the pages and setting the mood for some different scenes and everything. The biggest thing for me, I think, with Ross's art, and this is the same thing I ran into with Marvel's, is it really sucks to read his or to see his art on like standard trade paperback size. Like I just feel like it's such a disservice to his work, and it just I don't know. I mean, I think shrinking that art down, I feel like it just takes something away from it. And I'm not sure if it's the coloring or whatever, but that just to me it took something away from it. I wish I had an absolute version of this, but I know that's kind of hard to find. So
It came out recently. I think it came out in 2018. So you might be able to still track it down. I do want to say though, one of my biggest issues with the way the book is presented in panel layouts is you have these very kind of panels laid over top, and sometimes you don't get a defining box that separates them. And with Timeline's lack of onomatopoeia for sound effects, a lot of times it feels like I'm looking at more something like a Norman Rockwell painting than a comic book.
yeah, definitely.
And that's kind of when one of the always main things of Alex Ross's art I've had. Like, I'm not gonna like it's fantastic, but in terms of like the big scene, for example, when we see the first big fight happen, we have that huge lightning bolt that like shoots down, but there's no onomatopoeia or sound effect there, so it looks like I'm just looking at some static kind of image. I don't feel like an energy to it, really, or not. Which is a weird thing to say. Like you can definitely get that when reading it, but for like when you're so used to an onomatopoeia or sound effect being there, it's a little bit weird to adjust to.
That's weird. I don't remember ever it not being there. I guess that's one thing you don't notice.
Well, yeah, I don't think that's as much of an Alex Ross thing. I think that's just Painted Comics, and obviously it goes to Alex Ross because he's
normally you'd see like a giant zap or something there, but nothing there in terms of onomatopoeia.
Yeah, I mean Ross is obviously the poster child of Painted Comics. I would argue he's one of like 2-3 people who've ever done it successfully in the mainstream. So like it's going to get a tribute to him, but I just kind of don't like Painted Comics generally. I think they don't work super well. I think the storytelling is stiff. It's kind of lifeless. Just like, and actually, I wanted to go back to your point because you said like why have they not adapted this to animated film? And I don't know how they would do that because some of the animated films, and this was actually we talked about this briefly on our last favorite issues episode, maybe the last 2, because I talked about what's so funny. Whatever the fucking Superman versus the Elite issue. So funny about
Truth, Justice, the American Way. You had it right last week, by the way.
and Mike talked about an issue of All-Star Superman, and both of those were adapted. And one of them they kind of tried to hew to Frank Whiteley's style a little bit, and they also have done that with some of the other stories, like Dark Knight Returns, like DC: The New Frontier, and other things. And sometimes they don't try, like the recent Death and Return of Superman. Like,
well, they didn't try on that one because it was set in that new 52 connected universe. But I going back to that, I watched the last one, the Justice League Dark Side War, or whatever it was called, which is the last of those movies that they're doing. So I know they more recently they have reached out to Elseworld stuff. We did get Batman Gotham by Gaslight recently, and with the new pivot of we're kind of out of the realm of getting those new 52 centric movies. I think it is an idea to maybe we can bring up getting this adapted again. Because Dark War was like 120, it was like 93 minutes. Normally when those movies are like 72, I don't see why you can't do this in 93 minutes. And Superman Red Son, which is even shorter, I think was also hitting that 90-minute runtime.
Well, my point has nothing to do with Elseworlds, and it has nothing to do with length. My point is, how do you handle this visually in comparison to the original? Because I think it's entirely pointless to attempt to be anywhere near Alex Ross's art, because the whole point is Alex Ross and his painted style, he's attempting he's attempting realism, and you're just not going to do that in animation. If you try to do that in animation, I'm pretty sure it's going to look like absolute dog shit. And so,
that's the thing. I mean,
dog shit?
how faithful do you want to be with it? I know Red Sun has a very distinctive look, and with that, it's more of their traditional kind of how style the animation looks now. But I didn't think the movie was bad for not looking like that. But I do think you do bring up a good point with, if you want to try to do this, and they've never tried to do an Alex Ross piece before in animation, and I don't think it can be done.
Yeah, I don't think they can do it, and I think if they do go up kind of a more muted house style kind of animation, then it is going to look even weirder if you're familiar with the source material. So I think, honestly, they could do it, and they're probably more likely to do that than ever adapt this in live action. But ultimately, if they wanted to adapt this, and it's moot conversation because totally different budgets, totally different everything. But if they wanted to do this, it should be in live action, because that's the closest you're going to get to Alex Ross.
Which is funny because I brought it up, but we did get the Kingdom Come Superman suit in live action TV budget, but that was the best Superman costume we've seen and put to TV or film in quite a long time. Yeah, so
I had a general idea of kind of when I wanted to hit on these points, but we're kind of freewheeling it. So on that, a big part of Kingdom Come is a lot of these new characters, or like legacy characters that are shown here, the character design, and then the weird bleed effects, which Mike touched on how this has influenced a lot of things in the mainstream DC universe or in other stories, even in other media. And at first, just in general, a lot of the designs, they're kind of this bizarre middle ground, which is intentional, where like a lot of the key characters are a mix between like kind of a classic aesthetic, which you would expect from Alex Ross and which you would expect from some of the tone of the story. And then also when you get to the more background characters, you get like this weird attempt at 90s satire, but also with a futurist bent. So like the Flash and Green Lantern are, as far as the major characters, Flash and Green Lantern are standouts because they have very unique designs which are original to the story, but they're like a weird mix between Golden Age and then current. So like Green Lantern is it's clearly Alan Scott, but he's like very clearly using Hal Jordan-like powers, and is also rocking a look very similar to what Hal Jordan probably had around this time, or would have, or no, actually, no. I guess he's close to what
giant shoulders and stuff.
Yeah, I guess he's actually close to what no, never mind. He's close to what Alan Scott was wearing around this time when he was like Sentinel or whatever it was called. But his powers, I would say, are much more evocative of Hal Jordan. But the Flash is weird because he totally has the aesthetic. He basically has the helmet of Jay Garrick, and it's not explained at all. But through the background, we know that it's supposed to be Wally West, and that sort of makes sense. And there's an interesting connection and comparison there because obviously Mark Waid is kind of the definitive Wally West writer. Though we don't really get much of Flash here, besides just a cool.
To know what for the write up in the back, it says the Flash emanating from the Speed Force. The future Flash may hold all the spirits of the previous incarnations. So pick and choose which one you want.
Okay.
But also on Batman's team, he has the daughter of Wally West. So I don't know.
Yeah. And then, so one of the weirdest costumes, and this kind of gets into my point as I go forward, is Captain Atom, who is kind of a mix. It's a mix of, it's not a mix. It's basically the original Ditko design before the second Ditko design, which is also before kind of the mainstream DC one. So you have two costumes in Charlton. And this is basically that original one, which is like this orange and yellow monstrosity. But then with like this like 90s thing where it's like, make him a tic-tac-toe board and just put a ton more lines on it. And that gets to part of what drags this book down to me down for me. And yes, like it's not part of the book, but it's hard to separate how it impacts other stuff and how it reflected on things going forward. It's like, yes, like you can read Watchmen on its own, it works on its own, but before Watchmen and Doomsday Clock exist now, and you can't necessarily entirely ignore them. And that's the same thing here. So the Kingdom, which Mike referenced, it's pointless and it's bad, except there's one tie-in, which is Offspring, which is like the future son of Plastic Man, which is Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely. So pick that up in the back issues, ignore the Kingdom. And
but with that point, the Kingdom and Thy Kingdom Come aren't in print. Like those books are relatively hard to find, while Kingdom Come's always in print.
Well, I mean, Thy Kingdom Come is in the JSA omnibuses and stuff.
Right, but it's not
DC's
like
currently reprinted that material.
If you want to read just Thy Kingdom Come, it's hard to find.
Sure. And then, yeah, so Thy Kingdom Come is like a mainline continuity. So the Kingdom is like sort of connected. And the Kingdom is also, that's where like Hyper Time gets involved in the like mainstream thing and whatever. But you could, that's mostly obscure, like Mike said. But Thy Kingdom Come is like,
I'm back.
Yeah, Thy Kingdom Come is like mainstream DC Universe. Jeff Johns, one of the core titles when it gets done, and that gets where this thing gets tied up into a confusing mess, where you start having this like confusion and conflation of Kingdom Come with other things like Earth 2, because Earth 2 also becomes a factor in JSA, obviously with Power Girl and everything like that. Power Girl plays a prominent role in this story. And then that's where you get Superman on Crisis on the CW or whatever, wearing the Kingdom Come suit when he's supposed to represent the Superman from Superman Returns, who is the Superman from the Christopher Reeve saga, who is essentially supposed to be Earth 2 Superman. I mean, essentially he's not necessarily Earth 2 Superman, but he's pre-Crisis Superman. It's from 1978. It's classic style. He reverses time by flying around the Earth. So it doesn't make sense that he's wearing the Kingdom Come suit, but they need the suit to be alternate enough to be distinguished from the main Superman. So it's like you get this, but they're really trying to go for like a classic Superman, not an alternate, not like a distinctly alternate Superman. They're trying to go for Earth 2 or pre-Crisis Superman.
It's funny you bring that up because I know they got Kevin Conroy to play Batman, like future Batman, and who had like the broken like skeleton, and he was wearing like a mech suit kind of thing, to the point where Kevin Conroy himself was saying he was playing Kingdom Come Batman. I was like, no, you're not playing Kingdom Come Batman. You're playing a Batman that has a mech suit.
And so then after I think it's basically after Infinite Crisis. So after one of Jeff Johns' crises, which involved Earth 2 Superman and stuff like that, Captain Atom, who was missing for a while, and there was like a dumb character, whatever. I'm not going to get into it. But Captain Atom in the main universe, but not really, suddenly is wearing his costume from Kingdom Come with no connection, no explanation. And his story from that point, the story is called Captain Atom Armageddon. He is suddenly in the Wildstorm universe as part of a crossover, which is doubly weird because like that's kind of the material that this story is pointing at and critiquing and moaning about. And there's more I want to say about that here, but a major thing that I actually kind of didn't really think about until Mike touched on it, and I guess this is based on, you read the back matter material and stuff like that, is that this was basically Ross's idea that he took to DC, and Wade is essentially jobbing it. I mean, he scripted it and stuff, and he was brought on board.
I would not say that he didn't do a good job, but
yeah, no, I'm not saying that, but he's jobbing it. Like this was it could have been, hypothetically, it could have been anyone. It was at some point supposed to be James Robinson, and that's different. That Wade versus Ross relationship is different from the Wade versus Busiek relationship on Marvels, and that actually kind of recontextualizes a lot of my thoughts about this and a lot of my notes, because I was kind of going to go into like a like a Mark Wade rant, but ultimately discover no, it's really Alex Ross rant, but all the points mostly remain the same, if not arguably stronger.
Well, here's the thing. You might still have a Mark Waid rant because the Kingdom was supposed to be a reuniting of Mark Waid and Alex Ross, but Ross left because Waid, he wasn't happy with the changes Waid wanted to make and take the story. So Ross went, I'm good.
which is also interesting because Marvel also milked the Marvels, but of course that's different because Marvels was not Elseworld or something. It wasn't supposed to necessarily stand on its own, even though obviously it does function in that way. It is an evergreen, but whenever there's a Marvels follow-up, it is a Kurt Busiek thing more if not as equally as an Alex Ross thing. So you have Marvel's project and then both of them doing their current separate things, follow-ups right now, and they've together reunited for it as well, as I mentioned earlier. But yeah, so all right, let me find some other shit to talk about. So honestly, I think the story here is the actual plot and everything and the structure is a little rough. I think Norman McKay is basically the exact same character as Phil Sheldon, but he's less compelling as a character. He's not a full-rounded character as much as Sheldon. Right. And basically the entire link of him here and the title of this series, Kingdom Come, which is the whole religious connection, it's pretty loose, and I don't think it ultimately works that well. I mean, Dan was talking about how he doesn't usually like narration, and he thinks that it worked here to some extent. I don't think it really does because like 90% of their narration, which is all linked to Norman McKay, like a quarter of their narration is just Norman McKay making biblical references, and I don't feel that they line up as closely to what's actually happening in the story. And then it all kind of becomes moot because, and let me know if you guys read it differently, but like Norman McKay, it's all leading to everything, and he does get involved in the main plot and confront Superman twice. But like the ultimate moment, and yes, like technically he is involved in the ultimate moment where he stops Superman from going nutso. But like the crucial moment where the Spectre's like, hey, it's your turn to make judgment, humans or superhumans, Norman McKay doesn't get to make the decision. He doesn't make a decision. Nothing happens on behalf of him. It's Billy who just does what he does, and there's no connection between them, right?
Yeah. Right. Well, it's even weirder because we have the scene with Deadman where I've always read it as the seeds are planted where McKay is going to learn that the Spectre isn't really a good guy. He's the spirit of death / spirit of vengeance here. And you're thinking that it's going to lead to a confrontation with the Spectre, and it doesn't really, other than unless you're going to infer that it's when he tells Spectre that he's not going to make the judgment. Like, but he never calls him out for being like, you're the spirit of death. Like, you don't have that moment.
I don't think he even says anything. Like the Spectre's like, hey, it's your turn. These are your options.
Yeah.
And then there's just no further lines from either of those two characters, and it just shifts focus to Cap and Superman. And so this big moment where Norman was supposed to, as the pastor and as the observer, this entire time taking up all these pages with all this narration, all these biblical references, there is no judgment that he calls.
Right.
So I think you could retell this story without Norman McKay and the Spectre whatsoever.
I mean, you could, because I said,
and I don't think it changes it. I mean, I think it makes it. I don't think it makes it worse or anything. You don't lose anything by taking them out.
Well, there's your point for the animated version. You can just omit that entire thing. But I could see them doing that definitely, because like I said, I mean, once after issue 1, McKay and the Spectre are basically just observers until the final issue. Though that does lead into my point. I know with the narration, I do have to say Todd Klein does a very great job lettering this book, as he chooses very distinct different boxes for the narration and the opening bookended text, along with the dialogue bubbles that are kind of unique to each character. So great job for the masterful Todd Klein, who has all the Eisners anyway.
He probably won a couple and was nominated for this.
I would not be surprised.
I mean, the way the Eisners work is it's different than the Oscars. Like an actor gets nominated for one role, and the Eisners, when you're nominated for writer, it encompasses all of your work from that year. So like every time, and he's a letterer, so like every time Todd Klein wins, he's winning for like 10 things. But
yeah,
I'm sure he won in 1996. I will check while Dan.
Spector's dialogue balloons are very unique to the Spector, while Norman McCain has like more traditional dialogue balloons, and then you have the narration scripture. So you get pretty crazy with everything, and it totally works.
I will check that while I allow Dan to speak.
Yeah, I mean, no, it's okay. I mean, yeah, like you guys said, I mean, now that I think about it, I mean, that Norman McKay stuff, yeah, you could remove that, and the story I don't think really suffers that much. Until you get to the very last like part with Superman inside of the UN, which I thought was obviously the main point there of having him around. But I feel like you could just insert another JLA character to do that exact same plot point, and that kind of work. Yeah, I was gonna say you have Wonder Woman do it, and that can, that can kind of help with her character that Vince has so much of an issue with in this book.
Well, yeah, because I think I couldn't hear your mic when you said what. Did you have a big problem with Wonder Woman?
No, because I think at the very end, everything wraps up, and I mean, like when she kills that one character, I forget what his name was.
Bach.
Yeah, when she kills him in like the fight, I mean, I feel like that's like probably one of the lowest points for her. But like, I don't know, like the whole thing being reinstated at the end. I mean, it's kind of just like wrapping up her whole story and kind of, for me at least. What?
I mean, that brought her around to a close too. So
yeah, I mean, it's just, and then you have that little epilogue at the end. I mean, for me at least, I feel like that kind of brings her back to like a status quo kind of point. But yeah, I mean, there are points in this book where it is a little dark for her, and yeah, I don't know. I don't really have a lot of exposure with the character, so I can't really delve into past characterizations of her to really make.
I mean, everyone is pretty much brought back to status quo by the end of this, and that's the point. But yeah, I wouldn't. Yeah, I don't think she's really that far off. I don't like her like only front skirt design. It's very weird. That's one of the more character designs I don't like that Ross chose for her. I think it doesn't really work.
So Todd Klein did win an Eisner in 1997 for, in part, Kingdom Come, and basically he was otherwise doing basically all the Sandman related stuff. He was lettering Batman at this point, but I think what's actually interesting is he was lettering the Spectre. And similar to how the Flash page kind of reflects a tiny bit on Mark Waid's contemporary Flash work, it'd be interesting to kind of compare this to the Spectre, though I don't, there's probably not very much comparison at all, because the Spectre doesn't do anything here. He's just serving his crisis role, but even less than that. Actually, while I'm on this page, I will say Alex Ross won the Eisner for Best Painter, Multimedia Artist, Interior Art, which is a kind of niche award. Best Cover Artist, he also won this year, and for Astro City as well. And Editor, Dan Raspler, won for this, Hitman, Spectre, Best Limited Series for this, and then later Best Publication Design for the reprint the next year. Yeah, so I mean, here's the thing. So ultimately, what is the message here? Like, yes, the message is Superman is like this all good inspiration Christ figure, however you want to spin it. And I will co-sign that forever, obviously. But the other message here, like, kind of is, I mean, yes, it's this is not really it. Like, yes, the message is actually like, don't kill, if you're a hero, don't kill people, don't be super violent. But like, as far as the designs and kind of the way that Norman McKay looks at it and the way it's set up with Wesley Dodds and everything like that, you can boil it down to old heroes equals good and new heroes equals bad. none of the
Well,
new heroes.
I don't inherently think that, because Batman's able to turn a lot of the legacy and newer heroes onto his side
Yeah, but
too.
are any of them? But and I did think about that. But what makes me, kind of waver on that is if you really wanted to present that as like less of a generational thing and more of a thing, what you could do is give any of those characters characterization, let alone name them like within the actual story. Like every character who plays a prominent role and has lines and is like named and everything like that is a character that we know who exists in the mainstream universe, or they're a bad guy.
Right.
I think if you wanted that more of a nuanced thing, you could have like, Wally West's daughter or whatever as like a named character as very prominent. But you don't really get there. The closest you have is like Dick Grayson has lines, but obviously he's the same as in the context of this, he's really in the same kind of league as all the other characters we know. But the thing is, like, this is kind of late to the party. Like 1996, Alan Moore is writing Wildcats, Warren Ellis is on Stormwatch, unless they're calling that stuff out too. Like the 90s, like that was like 2, 3, 4 years ago at this point. Like Image has existed for 5 years by now. Alan Moore is also about to write Supreme, which is a ridiculous Rob Liefeld creation, but which he turns into like one of the best covert runs on Superman ever.
And then in a year, we're going to get Morrison on JLA and Busick on Avengers.
And then, this point is slightly lessened based on what you revealed about Wade versus Ross, but like the guy who created Cable is about to take your job on Captain America, which, okay, that's shitty. Like, let's call him out, with his Cable design. But also, he's able to do that. That's set up because Mark Waid is playing a crucial, prominent role in plotting Onslaught, which is stupid, bloated, terrible design, stupid characters, and bad. So it's like, at least on the Mark Waid side, it's like I don't put Mark Waid on a pedestal above the people of the 90s. I mean, the 90s was his decade as well, and you can say, and I would agree, that his work in was obviously better than Youngblood, but it's kind of moot because this isn't really his concept anyways. This is more of a Ross thing. And
but who do they get to write Captain America after Liefeld can't do 5 issues on time?
Well, yeah, James Robinson, or no?
So
no, it's Jeff. I don't know. I think it's James Robinson. I think James Robinson picked up like all the books, but like originally I was gonna say like, and this is me boiling it down, and I kind of self-identify with this word in the context of comics myself. But like I was gonna say like this is Mark Waid's boomer rant, but really I've kind of come around that I don't really consider Mark Waid as much of a boomer. I mean, he wrote that Avengers run, which it was like half and half, like half Miles, Sam Alexander, Kamala Khan, and half, Vision and whatever the hell other character. But like, and Alex Ross, I think did some of the. Actually, I don't think it was for that series, but like Alex Ross in recent years has done covers for like the Amazing Spider-Man era with the stupid glowing spider. He's done covers for, I think, for Champions. He's done covers for like iffy eras of Avengers and things like that.
Well, the thing with Ross that we've always heard with him is he doesn't have as much as an attachment to the Marvel characters as he does the DC characters. So, I mean, Ross has famously said he'll never draw Kyle Rayner Green Lantern. So,
well, yeah. So, there's, and that's kind of what I was getting to is like Alex Ross is the boomer here, and this book kind of comes off as Alex Ross being a boomer, and he's mad that people like Rob Liefeld essentially. And it's like they design the design notes for Magog were basically, make fun of Cable. But the thing is, like, Magog looks cool. And Alex Ross eventually admits that, where he's like, Magog is cool. And Cable is cool. Like, sure, like,
But the point, I'd argue Magog has more of a character here than Cable does until 2008.
I disagree, and I'll say that Fabian Nicias's X-Force run is underrated, and for the direct dig, it's better than what Mark Waid was doing on the main, like, more top tier X-Men books at this exact time as Kingdom Come. But the thing is, like, Cable is cool. Like, it's comic book. That's all you gotta say. Like, no one questions, Jack Kirby's OMAC. Like, oh, OMAC's like it's just cool. Like, Cable, he has a big gun. He has these weird football shoulder pads.
That because I don't think if you were to put 5 comic book fans in a room, and now I'm not going to include you in that room because you'd actually know it, but can anyone actually name Cable's mutant power?
Yeah, but I mean, that you can apply that to a lot of characters. But I don't think that's that much important. But also, like, Cable initially, like, drawn by.
What I'm saying with that is we like him because he's the cool big gun-toting guy, which
but, like,
the same like Bishop. We might not necessarily know their mutant powers, but
what's wrong with liking a character because he has a big gun and he kicks ass? Like, I don't think there's a problem with that. I think it's fun. It's comic books. They're supposed to be fun. And that's what Alex Ross is whining about.
The point where it can't always be that. At least for me. There's guilty pleasures, but, like, I'm not gonna. I mean, I love the Dwayne Szierski 2008 Cable series, but I mean, and then again, I haven't read a bunch of 90s X-Force, so
and I obviously agree that it can't always be that, but, like, Alex Ross is saying, like, that shouldn't be a thing. Like, sort of, that's what he's saying. And it's just it's kind of weird, and I feel like the message of this, it's not really clear. It's not as clear as it kind of thinks it is, and I don't think it's as, like, righteous as it is. And
I think I can see that, but also, like, things change with age too. So
and that's the other thing is that I think this story is a lot more stuck to its time period and a lot more dated than Marvel's, even though people think of this one as kind of the more evergreen and story because it's an Elseworlds and everything like that. But as far as the storyline and the message here, it's a lot different.
Well, what's the message of Marvel's other than you're just chronicling the history of the Marvel Universe?
That's it. I mean, the message is just heroes are cool, but it's not saying these heroes are cool and these heroes are not cool. I mean, you could, and not just Marvel's, like, compare this overall message to Marvel and also, like, Astro City. And Marvel's, like, the final page of Marvel's, compared to kind of the message of this, is that Marvel's ends with, hey, that's our mailman kid. What's his name? It's Danny Ketch. And it's this hopeful look towards the 90s. And it's like, sure, Danny Ketch is not Youngblood, but, like, it's still 1994. So, like, Danny Ketch was, like, 4 years in. It was probably a terrible book by that point. But it's still, like, a hopeful note toward that decade, toward that generation of heroes. Whereas this one, it's like,
right.
Again, like, yes, there are positive examples of these generations, but we don't get to know any of them. There's no, like, kind of hopeful look towards it. In the end, we're still focused on the Trinity.
Well, I disagree with the fact that near the end, the newer characters are brought to Paradise Island to get better.
Sure. A less ridiculous gulag.
Yeah.
So
I do have to realize, like, I do have to say, didn't they try that and it failed? But Paradise Island definitely isn't a.
Yeah, it's a different tactic. But so the other thing, and I think you guys can disagree with me on this to an extent, is that I think the epilogue isn't very necessary to the narrative, and it kind of just is there for fan service. I think the actual ending,
I think it works. Other than Batman ordering well done steak, that doesn't work.
Yes. So that is totally out of character. Like, Batman is, like, high class, very refined individual. Would never order a well done steak. I don't understand that.
Body can only materialize well done steak.
I don't
Not to mention
understand. That's the opposite. I mean, your body. I mean, if you have like a strict diet, I don't know what you'd want. Probably in the middle ground or something. Because I feel like well done steak would not. I don't know how digestion works, but the actual ending works fine and is the more hopeful moment. With the epilogue, the ending now is a jerk off of the Trinity and of the original era, and not really. It becomes less. I mean, yes, like Diane is pregnant, and they're like, "Oh, we're going to raise this kid." But I feel like that's a little bit overshadowed by the three of them on the page, and it's less of a look to the future and more of like the future, yes, but also these three characters are going to remain the center point.
Well, in any generation of DC, those three characters are always going to be the center point.
Yeah, but like they're 90 years old here, and it's kind of, I don't know. I don't think it really works. And then here's the other thing. So you said that, like, you know, Superman and Wonder Woman have a kid here, and Dan was curious about that. And you said it's set up and everything like that. I don't think it's set up. Obviously, they have a lot of conversations throughout because they're basically foils and they're friends and everything.
Is that Bruce finds out Diane is pregnant. They're going to have a kid. They ask Bruce to be the godfather, so the kid will be raised not exclusively under superhumans, but will also have the guidance of Bruce, who also is human. So it'll be like the best of both worlds scenario. Though I do want to point out the ending of the book is all three of them kind of like all hanging out and going, let's go dream about the future. So it is kind of like a look towards tomorrow ending with them as guiding, which, I mean, take that as you will if you like that or not. But I do like the moment where Batman and Superman hug. I like that because that's kind of one of my moments to show like the stupid era that we're in where these two characters can't ever be friends is the most dumb thing in the world to me, and it always has been. But like, yeah, the only setup here is that they have a child. That they're going to have a child, and that child is, I mean, going to have to live eventually to be that pedestal of the child of all three of them, and it might, whether it might be a son or a daughter, they don't even say that yet. They speculate.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, I get that they want to have that ending where, oh, these three are going to raise the future. But I'm saying, and I guess it's just convenient because there's only one female in this group of three. But I'm saying specifically the Superman and Wonder Woman pairing, I don't think it's really set up here. They have a lot of conversations because they're presented as foils, they're close friends, and they're working together. Unlike Batman, there is one kiss in this story, but it's not really a genuine kiss. It's not really shared by Clark. The way it's written is like, it's almost like a petty move or a vindictive move where it happens right before Wonder Woman is like, hey, we got to go off in battle. Like, if you're going to be a pussy, I'm out of here. And then suddenly now here it's like, oh, here's a time skip, and they had a baby.
And Wonder Woman does bring Clark his glasses back, and they have that moment where they're up in space, lassoing the asteroids. So it's set up, but I agree. It's not set up well, but
yeah. And then like the thing is that this actually, which is really only in the epilogue, because there's no relationship, like there's no hint at romance. Like you can say there are tiny little hints that you can use as setup, but there's there's no relationship before the epilogue, which is an epilogue. But then this is part of this story, which is one of the things that influences other stories and other media more than a lot of the other elements. And it's interesting that this is also one of the points that Wade often pushes. Wade is like, this is a cautious story. It's an Elseworlds. It's not supposed to represent or reflect or impact the main universe. And specifically, he hits that point with this relationship. But they put it in the book, and now based on not Kingdom Come, just these like 9 pages or whatever, we've now for the past 25 years constantly had Superman and Wonder Woman set up as a relationship. And it kind of comes out of left field and is not set up well here. So like, who looked at this and was like, let's do that? I think because they looked at it as they just saw the fan service, which is, I think, a majority of what this epilogue boils down to.
Well, I mean, the fact that it's set in a restaurant of fan service, definitely.
Yeah, I will say though, as far as Easter eggs and the fan service, I do appreciate how as they walk out on the wall is New Fun Comics #1,
Yeah.
which is DC's first comic and the first comic book with all original material and not comic strip reprints.
There's also the first. There's Wiz Comics #2 is
Yeah.
also on the wall as well.
Yeah, which obviously there's that's more tribute to Cap. I also I could nitpick on the UN scene, the final UN scene, because like the whole point earlier, and Wonder Woman basically pushes Superman to realize, when things are ramping up, she's like, we are a nation, we are a people, like superheroes, like the metahumans, we have to control metahumans, we have to, lead the path on metahumans. It's our it's our problem, it's our responsibility. And the message ultimately that Clark realizes is like, that's not true. We have to work with them. But then he sets up a flag specifically for metahumans. Like, it's supposed to be this tribute to Cap.
Yeah.
But like, if you read into it too much, it's like, oh, we're integrating with you, but what we're doing by putting up this flag is a flag for superheroes alongside the flags of nations. So it's a visual moment. It makes sense visually and emotionally, but if you think too hard, it doesn't mesh with the message.
My response to that is it's a visual medium.
Yeah, I mean, I'll make my ultimate point, and then I will let you guys close this out. So honestly, like I'm just a bit of bias. Like, I don't really like Elseworlds. It's just kind of fan fiction, which I'm not really like that much of a fan of. I feel like kind of the old, because ultimately Elseworlds are imaginary stories, they're alternate universe, and that's a big thing in DC, and that's how they set up Elseworlds. But like the original things, when you had a Crisis storyline in JLA, it's like, here's this weird, or like a imaginary story in Superman. It's like, here's this weird world, and in some manual we'll eventually call it Earth 65 or whatever, but it doesn't fucking matter. Like, unless it is Earth 2 or it's Earth S and everything like that, there are only like 5 Earths that matter at the height of DC. But like these Elseworlds, like when you really get into, and they're cool, like there are cool elements and I like them on that level, but it's like when you really get into like Vampire Batman and Medieval Knight Superman and Kingdom Come, it's like I don't really care that much. And that's just my like totally arbitrary subjective bias. But then like, and this goes back to kind of my Alex Ross points, is like, this is all Alex Ross kind of does. Like, after this, he does Earth X, and then its sequels, which each one is worse. He does Justice, which that's like kind of in a weird area where it's kind of not canon, but you can force it in.
Justice,
but I'm not.
His love letter to the Super Friends, and it's really where you find out that Jim Krueger and Alex Ross aren't the greatest writers in the world.
Yeah. And then there's Project Superpowers, there's Kirby Genesis, which it's the same kind of thing. It's like Boomer, like whatever you want to call it. And I would say Marvels and Kingdom Come, besides those, the only other great work from Alex Ross are the Paul Dini OGNs, which I think if you really look critically, you could argue that those are his best work, but like those aren't even really comic books to an extent.
No,
they're really picture books.
There's not even panels in them.
So,
which I'm on the absolute of that, and they're awesome. But no, I totally agree.
So, is Alex Ross really like a comic book storyteller? I don't know. I don't know. I will say I love Marvels.
Yeah, I mean, I love Marvels and I love Kingdom Come. I think they're both very good and they're both great, and I think they're definitely standouts you should have in any collection. Definitely.
Yeah, I will. This will be the last word I say. I will clarify. I like this. I think it's a decent story, and I think it's definitely should be kind of, to an extent, like quote unquote required reading for DC fans. But I just kind of took a more critical angle this time.
No, and I feel like I was definitely taking mine as well. Where like I don't think the panel work in this is perfect by any means. I think a lot of the panels layered over top each other with not a lot of gutters between separation makes some pages very hard to follow, which also kind of date it in that 1996 style where maybe that was more of a thing. I think what would have been a more cool idea is as the story unfolds, you get more traditional as the book goes on, would be a little bit more of a cool thing to play with. But we didn't get that. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say, like, I love this. Like, it's one of my favorites. I've read it since I've been, like, 4 years old. So it clearly by the copy that by the end of this review might need to get fully replaced by the end of this. Because it's, like, falling apart in my hand. But, yeah, like, it has its problems, but, like, I'm not going to consciously, like, tear it down because there's some things here and there. DC definitely has taken this as a property to IP to monetize to hell. There's Kingdom Come HeroClix. There were Kingdom Come action figures. It's been re-released in how many different formats? There's people like me who still would like to see an animated version of it at some point. And, you know, like, it's affecting, like, Wonder Woman 84, like I said. It's that armor's really damn close to the armor she wears in this. And Brandon Routh's walking around in straight up the Kingdom Come outfit in the CW universe. So, I mean, it's going to have its lasting impact, and it's not going to go away. It's going on 25. It's over 25 years old, 20 or going to be 25 years old, and the impact's still there. So definitely there's bad to it, but I think it does show that timeless appeal where it's a book from '96 that we're still talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think personally, for someone like me who's read this the first time, like with you guys, I mean, if you grab this book and you give it to somebody that like just knows a very limited amount of information about these characters, I mean, they can still enjoy it. And I can see, from Vince's point of view, like, someone who has a lot of deep rooted history with these characters. There's a lot of things that might not be like worth developing, I guess, in this book that you're looking at, but I don't know. I think it was pretty solid. I mean, we talked about it before we went on air, but like the first issue's kind of slow in my opinion, and I mean, but the rest of it is just amazing. And the Alex Ross art, it kind of like looking at this art kind of makes me think that this came before Marvel's, because I thought Marvel's was a little bit more refined. But I don't know.
I mean, I'll say it's kind of an ending note. I've read it how many countless times, and it's kind of a fun thing to always go back to every now and then, because even with this reading, I was still picking up more new Easter eggs and characters in the background that I've never seen before. So it's got that fun factor if you like that. So I got nothing else to say other than you should definitely recommend picking up Kingdom Come, and there's no pick of the week unless the pick of the week is Kingdom Come. So
we should pick our issues.
The pick of the week for me is Marvels. Yeah, I didn't pay close enough attention to pick an issue. Probably Captain Marvel one. I don't know.
Issue 3, because that's the one I made the cool cover Friday this week, I guess. Like, I'm not going to come out here and say that's the pick, but definitely pick this one up. Pick it up in the Absolute if you can find it. Pick it up in the deluxe hardcover, standard size trade paperback, standard size hardcover. Whoever the hell DC's collecting anything nowadays. Pick up the Black Label edition. I know there's a Black Label edition of this now too. So I got nothing else to say.
I'm curious. I want to see how much the Absolute goes for online now.
Yeah, 50 Marvel or DC books to have, probably 25. I wouldn't put this in the 10 category.
It's actually
I'd say top 20, maybe top 15, but probably not.
You can get new on Amazon for $60.
Yeah, Absolute.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
That's not bad. That's not bad for an Absolute.
No, all right. There's your plug for Jeff Bezos, his tax evading ass, as we close things. Thanks for watching, and tune in next week where we have no idea what we're going to do. But there will be something, we think.
We're not being monetized by Amazon in the near future.
Unless we all die. Goodbye.